They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but what happens when it's a woman doing the scorning? And what if hell is nothing more than El Paso, Texas? Apparently one hell of a catfight. You see, in the spring of 1886, a pair of El Paso madams went to war over a young soiled dove by the name of Bessie Colvin. And by the time the smoke cleared, one of them had a bullet in her hoo-ha, and the other was arrested for attempted murder. And that's what we'll be discussing today. A little something I like to call the Battle of the Bordellos. First, though, I do think it's important to take a look at the time and place. Back in 1880, there were only like 700 people residing in El Paso. And then, over the course of the next decade, the population exploded over 10,000, mostly on account of the railroad. And as I'm sure you can imagine, a boost in population also meant a boost in crime. Matter of fact, it wasn't long before El Paso became known as the six-shooter capital of the world. Or as visiting president Benjamin Harrison once referred to it, Sin City. Of course, back in those days, El Paso, like many other western towns, was basically just two separate entities. On one side, you had all the so-called decent people. That's where you'd find legitimate businesses and churches and schools, stuff like that. And on the other side of town, you had something known as the Tenderloin District. That's where a man could find temporary love, get a good drunk on, and gamble away his money, quite possibly even his life. It's also where the broken lived, the downtrodden, the unfortunate, along with those that like to prey on them. And within the Tenderloin District, you had an area known as the Utah Street Reservation, where hundreds of soiled doves plied their trade. And by soiled doves, I do mean prostitutes. One of whom was a lady by the name of Alice Abbott, or as the locals called her, Fat Alice. Now, we don't know much about Alice other than she was probably born sometime in the early to mid 1850s, and she came to El Paso by way of Louisville, Kentucky. Dark-haired and thin-lipped, with a somewhat plump face, Alice could be best described as looking a little on the stout side, like the kind of lady who could lift heavy objects, as well as a heavy man if need be. But you can only tell so much from a picture, right? Thankfully, as far as Alice is concerned, we've got plenty of eyewitness descriptions. They say she stood 6 feet tall and weighed anywhere from 190 to 230 pounds, hence the name Big or Fat Alice. Now, me personally, I do kind of take issue with that, because first of all, how the hell did they know how much she weighed? I highly doubt she was going around advertising it. And secondly, even at the high estimate of 230 pounds, that's not exactly what I'd call huge, especially on a 6-foot frame. And look, man, let's be honest. They don't call them love handles for nothing, right? As far as I'm concerned, the bigger the fupa, the tastier the chalupa. Now, although Alice got her start as a regular working gal, by the time the mid-1880s came around, she was already operating her own joint over on Utah Street, or as it's called nowadays, South Mesa. Now, interestingly enough, prostitution was not legal at that time in El Paso. In fact, they even had laws specifically against what they referred to as wanton women. But then again, they also had a workaround. As long as Alice Abbott and her colleagues paid a weekly fine of around $10, they were able to keep operating. And the best part was that $10 went straight to the local police department. So in other words, everybody was getting paid and everybody was getting laid. But not everybody was equal. You see, there were levels to the whore game back in the Old West, especially in places like El Paso. At the bottom of the rung, you had what was called the crib girls, sort of like your modern-day streetwalkers. They advertised their goods in the public thoroughfares and took clients back to small little dens known as cribs. These women could be purchased for as little as 50 cents, and for the most part, they led pretty miserable lives. And I say that out of pity as opposed to judgment. Sex trafficking was very common back in those days. Many of these women couldn't even speak English, and most of them were definitely working against their will. We'll talk more about that here in just a bit, but next up, we got the saloon girls. Think of the gals who worked for Skinny in the movie Unforgiven, or better yet, the Gym Saloon on HBO's Deadwood. Just like on the show, they'd meet their clientele in the saloon proper, and then take them in the back or upstairs to trade some lovin' for money. Once again, we're dealing with women who oftentimes did not have a choice in what they were doing. They'd be lured to town under false pretenses with promises of legitimate work, only to be turned out and forced into prostitution. And if you wanted to leave, you did so at your own peril. Of course, you also had the more upscale establishments. Once again, I'll use Deadwood as an example, best show of all time. But you remember Cy Tolliver and the Bella Union? Remember what he said to Al Swearingen when he came sniffing around? We're offering different atmospheres. You're a pioneering type, trailblazing type. You're going to draw a trailblazing element. To which Swearingen replied, meaning I get the ones who don't wash. And yeah, that is kind of what it meant. The fancier the place, the cleaner the girls, and the more money a man could expect to spend. Especially at the even fancier joints like the Chesamee. That's the place that Joni Stubbs opened up when she broke from Tolliver. And from what I understand, that is exactly the type of place that Alice Abbott was operating over in El Paso. A proper parlor house. Only problem was she wasn't the only game in town. You see, there was another madam across the street known as Etta the Grasshopper Clark. And believe it or not, despite the violence that we'll soon be discussing, these two ladies hadn't always been enemies. Matter of fact, not only did Etta once work for Miss Alice, but we also have evidence that at one point in time, they may have even been lovers. Of course, whatever they had between them was long gone by the spring of 1886, especially after a young prostitute named Bessie Colvin decided to quit working for Alice and try her luck over at Etta's place. And by the way, Bessie wasn't just one of Fat Alice's top earners, she was also one of the most popular working gals in all of El Paso. And apparently she knew it. She and Alice had been arguing over money for the better part of a year. Finally, it all came to a head on the evening of April 18th, 1886. That's when Bessie marched out through Alice's parlor, telling all who'd listen that, quote, "Prime cut will soon be found across the street," end of quote. Prime cut, of course, meaning her little poontang. And that's the good thing about being good at what you do. If you're an average employee, you're replaceable, or at the very least, it might be hard to find new employment. But you learn you a good skill, a good trade, you can take it anywhere. Bessie knew she had that sweet poussée, that's French for pussy, and she knew that it would be just as appreciated working for the Grasshopper. Only problem is, one just doesn't simply walk away from Fat Alice Abbott. See, at first Alice sent two of her other gals over there to collect Bessie, but when they returned empty-handed, she decided to handle it herself. Marched across the street and began banging on Etta's door, demanding to be let in. Etta, for her part, wasn't having it. Rather than invite Alice inside, she instead just cracked the door open and basically told her to go kick rocks. At which point Alice went ahead and just ripped the door completely off its hinges and came barreling in, smashing her fist into Etta's face in the process. Now, it just so happened that Etta was holding a gas lighter, the kind they use to ignite street lamps or ceiling lights. Really doesn't sound like much, but these things were pretty damn heavy. They were also made of brass, so wasn't exactly something you'd want to get slapped in the face with. Which, as fate would have it, is exactly what Etta tried doing. But Alice had her dander up, and there weren't no stopping her. See, when Etta swung that lighter, Alice just deflected the blow and once again rammed her fist into Etta's mouth, sending the smaller madam reeling across the floor. She then grabbed Bessie by the wrist and tried dragging her outside. Meanwhile, Miss Etta ran to her quarters and retrieved a little bone-handled revolver, what they called a bulldog revolver. She then cocked it, aimed it at Alice, and told her to get the hell out. Then when Alice charged at her, that's when Etta hollered, quote, "I'll kill the damn bitch," and then squeezed the trigger, sending a bullet straight into Alice's moneymaker. That's right, you heard me correctly. Etta shot Alice in the cooter. "My God, I'm shot," Alice bellowed, staggering out of the cat house and collapsed into the street. Etta followed and fired again, but missed, at which point three of Alice's girls came running to drag her to safety. Hey, just real quick, today's episode is brought to you by Quince. And I tell you what, I'm actually wearing a Quince hoodie right now as we speak. We don't get a lot of cold weather down here where I live, especially this time of the year. So I just needed something light and comfortable, and Quince most definitely delivered. It's soft, it fits just right, and I can already tell it'll be the first thing I grab off the hook come winter time. And if you are still hanging on to those same worn out basics, take it from me and treat yourself. Quince specializes in everyday staples that just work harder. Ultra soft organic cotton tees, premium Mongolian cashmere sweaters, denim, and even tailored chinos. And the best part is, everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Not only that, but they work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman. So in other words, you're paying for high quality instead of just a bunch of brand markups. And by the way, it ain't just clothing. They've also got hotel quality bedding, bath essentials, cookware, and even travel gear. So what are you waiting on? Upgrade your everyday. Download the Quince app for app-exclusive offers, or go to quince.com/wildwest. Get free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada and the UK too. That's QUINCE.com/wildwest. QUINCE.com/wildwest. Now, back to the show. Now, it turns out that 44 slug struck Alice in her pubic arch, a medical term that the El Paso Herald would report the following day, either accidentally or tongue-in-cheek, as her public arch, alluding to her profession. Now, I initially didn't know what a public arch was, so I looked it up, and according to Merriam-Webster, who I do not believe ever worked as a prostitute, The public arch is the notch formed in the inferior rami of the two conjoined pubic bones as they diverge from the midline. Okay? Now, for those of you like me without a medical degree or, anything resembling a brain cell, it's basically the very bottom of your pelvis. Think about those plastic skeletons they used to have hanging up in science class. You know that bone that comes down and around in sort of a U shape at the very front? Right underneath where your gut ends and right above everything that matters? That's the pubic arch. And luckily for Alice, the bullet passed just to the right of it and went clean through without hitting any vitals. Still, though, it would take quite a long time before she was back on her feet and her knees, making that money. As for Etta, she turned herself in and was charged with attempted first-degree murder. Apparently, she had a good lawyer, as less than a month later, she was found not guilty on grounds of self-defense. And while I do agree that she was definitely defending herself, you also gotta kind of wonder how many of her customers were on that jury. Now, interestingly enough, just a little over 2 years after that, on July 12th, 1888, Etta's brothel was burnt to the ground. And according to some, it was Alice who struck the match. Maybe. I'm not going to lie, I only found one source on this, and it comes from an El Paso Community College publication called Borderlands. The authors are Sunshine Mendez and Olga Joanne Vallis, and according to them, quote, "It was later determined that Fat Alice had hired some drunks to set fire to her enemy's house, but because of gaps in the evidence, Alice and her hired bunch were acquitted," end of quote. Now, eventually, a rich client came along and built Etta a brand new parlor. Man's wife actually divorced him over it, so he and Etta went on to live as husband and wife without ever officially getting married. There would be yet another fire in 1905, and this time Etta barely survived. Matter of fact, she passed away just a few years later, in 1908, due to complications from all the smoke. But what about Alice? Well, she continued pimping there in El Paso until February of 1890. That's when she leased her brothel to another infamous madam by the name of Tilly Howard. And finally, on April 7th, 1896, Alice died of a heart attack. As for Bessie Colvin, aka the Helen of El Paso, nobody knows what in the hell happened to her. I don't know if she was able to go legit, I don't know if she got married, or when or where she died, or anything like that. All I do know is that after everything we just discussed, the gunfight and all that drama, she still went back to work for Fat Alice. Now, most of the pictures we have of these ladies comes from Alice Abbott's own personal photo album, in which can be found some very interesting notes, including nicknames for the girls. There was one she called the Bitch of the Road, another referred to as the Missouri Whacker, and yet another she dubbed Lover Boy Mabel Jones. She also drew hearts around some of them, symbols that many think identify the girls who at one point or another doubled as Alice's lovers. Even Etta had a heart drawn around her. But then again, Alice also marked it out with a big red X and left a note claiming that she was a quote-unquote whore to N-words. Fun fact, the same revolver that Etta used to shoot Alice, a British Bulldog revolver, was also the same exact type of pistol used to assassinate President James Garfield. The only difference is the one that killed Garfield was chambered in .442. By the way, speaking of Garfield, this is not a paid ad, this is just a suggestion. If you haven't seen Death by Lightning on Netflix, I would highly recommend it. Probably one of the best things I've seen in a very long time, and it's actually pretty decent when it comes to historical accuracy. Now, before we close things out, I know I made a lot of dumb jokes today regarding prostitution, and I know it's oftentimes glamorized in the movies. But in all reality, like I said earlier, most of these women were living miserable lives, just lives of pure desperation. Whether it was due to addiction or trafficking, extreme poverty, abuse, coming from broken homes, or just a combination of all the above. Whatever the case, very few of these women were in that particular line of work because they wanted to be. And a whole lot of them died prematurely. Every single one of these ladies was somebody's daughter or little sister. And to this day, even here in the United States, we still don't know how many women are in that same position. All we really know is that as recently as 2023, the National Trafficking Hotline fielded reports involving nearly 17,000 potential victims. Those are just the people that picked up a phone. It's also about the same amount of people who are allegedly trafficked to the United States on an annual basis. And that's the part that gets me, man. These women were practically invisible in 1886, which sort of ties into Bessie Colvin, right? No birth record, no death record, no grave. Only reason we know she existed is because she was fought over as a piece of property. And sadly, these same women nowadays are just as invisible. I don't know how to fix it, but if you're like me and you have a daughter, I would highly suggest just letting them know how much you love them. Let them know that you're there for them, even if they mess up. Or as the late great Billy Joe Shaver once sang, don't let the darkness take them. Don't make them feel forsaken. Just lead them safely to the light. And I guess that's about all I've got on Fat Alice and the Battle of the Bordellos. Thank you so much for joining me. And for all you old school listeners, no, you're not imagining things. I did cover this story several years ago, but thought it would be nice to give it a little bit of a glow up. I don't know if I'm going to do this with all of my older episodes. I'm definitely planning on doing it with the death of Johnny Ringo. With that episode, there's some details I forgot to add that I think are very important. But yeah, there are some others I do want to revisit. And yeah, we're not going to do it all at once. Don't worry. Next time you hear from me will be a brand new episode. But that's all this was. It was just a way for me to redo an episode, make it a little bit better. All right, until next time, try not to shoot anybody in the vagina, okay? Just be nice to one another. Till then, adios.